Chapter 6. The Riddle of the Slave. Backtracking along the path that Jilu had traversed not 24 hours prior, he and Kai made good progress on their trek that Jilu now knew quite well. For the first time in his life he seemed to be in control of his surroundings and knew where to step safely in the wilderness. "We must take a diversion here," said Kai as they approached the city of Sipa. "My name is known in this region, and it would be unwise for me to be in such close proximity to the city itself." In total agreement, they crossed country to intercept the valley where the Santic flowed. Another dusk loomed in the darkening blue. Yet Kai was intent at reaching the gravesite before the inevitable nightfall. He seemed at one with the nighttime gloom, and picked up his pace to make good time. The tree line to their left thinned to reveal the rocky outcrops on top of the valley. They made their way to the abandoned stairway that Jilu had scaled the day before. Although only a day had passed since he tackled the wet and perilous climb, it seemed dry as a bone when they reached the summit of the stairs. In fact, the stairs seemed to be cleared of vegetation and debris completely, almost as though they were being prepared for further use. "I'm certain this path was as dangerous and slippery climb the last time I was here," said Jilu. "The waters get diverted in this place in strange ways, laddie," replied Kai. "I've seen flooded valleys dry out like deserts before my eyes here. Be prepared for anything." The duo carefully descended the stairs. Slowly the trees returned to the land as they climbed down further. With each step the sound of rushing water got louder and louder. The Santic seemed to be much more than a babbling stream that Jilu remembered. Now a clear foot deeper and running like a chain of rapids over each bend, the water was no longer the peat brown from before. Instead it was a torrent of black pools and white foam. It almost seemed angry at the world, like it was flushing some unseen disease out into the lek as quickly as its banks would allow. Jilu remembered Kai as he sung the Khan song. He spat away the cursed words like this apparent tide in the river valley. Perhaps this was a natural exorcism coming from the elements themselves. The banks of the Santic were now overflowing, and it became clear that their journey could not continue until they abated to allow a safe crossing. As dusk became night, the pair prepared a camp on a ledge above the river. A meal of dried meat and fruit was divided between them. They sat in silence, gazing at the valley, glimmering in the twinkling starlight filtering through the tree canopy. The light occasionally broke the darkness enough to illuminate the water, turning it into a long, undulating ribbon of glimmering, magical silver. They looked on in wonder at this treat of nature, but soon they decided to bed down to awake refreshed for the next morning's bounty, be it good or ill. Jilu awoke to see Kai already awake, sitting dangling his legs over the ledge. This morning was damp and a misty start to the new day. It had been a week since Jilu's banishment. He couldn't believe how far he'd journeyed in such a short time, both in distance and also life itself. The river's once flushing waters had shrunk back down to below its banks again. Perhaps it was possible to cross where the stepping stones were located. The morning mist left a heavy, dull thud in the air that obscured any dawn chorus of the birds. However, the pungent aroma of tree sap in the ether that morning was a powerful drug to both Kai and Jilu. They sat there for a few minutes in silent and sensual meditation. With every breath of this dawn air they felt rejuvenated. Making their way down the last few dozen stairs to the river bank, dappled sunlight started to flow through the dense foliage. Now the river turned from a spectral river of quicksilver into a trickling seam of gold. "This was the path," said Jilu. "At the marker stone. There you can use stepping stones to cross, but be careful." But when they made it down to the marker stone, it didn't seem right. Yes, it said Sipa, but there was no Q painted on it. The rains and flood must have washed it away in the night. Jilu worried that he would not be believed. Kai realised this and was quick to reassure him. It's okay, laddie. I know what you're thinking. I believe you. Using his wooden spear, Gilu's nerves stopped feeling so tense when he relocated the stepping stones exactly where he remembered them. Crossing them with care, they reached the other bank in short order. The long walk was in front of them back to Sand's gravesite. They walked on for several uneventful miles down the bank before Kai spotted something on the other bank. A quick flash of metal in the shrubs by waterside. Perhaps this was an assassin or maybe another spy sent by the Khan to stop their journey dead in its tracks. Literally. He chose not to mention this to Gilu as it would distract him from his task of leading them to the grave. So onward they went, with Kai's hand constantly hovering over his sword, ready to be drawn in the case of danger. They passed the other marker stone, which still bore faint remnants of the painted Q emblem. Gilu almost looked satisfied at being vindicated by this bloody omen's existence. They rounded the well-worn and waterlogged bend of the river, when Gilu broke into a sudden sprint. "Carefully now!" exclaimed Kai. "This is no time for rash decisions. We must be meticulous in our examination of all the evidence we can see, laddie." This did not slow Gilu, who continued his lightning-fast advance to his morbid trophy. There under that tree," Gilu's finger extending, pointing now at the tumbled pile of earth. Something wasn't right, though. They slowed to approach the pile of dirt and then stopped in their tracks. The earth was disturbed way too much to have been caused by intrigued animals or by the river's erosion. It was dug into, like a tomb that had been plundered by robbers. The final steps led them to their final bleak discovery. The grave was empty. Sand's bones were gone, and nothing was left apart from one tooth. Gilu stood shocked and horrified, even though he was convinced of Sand's actual purpose in life. Any desecration of this kind sickened him to the very depths of his soul. Carefully, Kai reached into the empty grave and took the tooth in a gloved hand so he wouldn't touch anything cursed with bare flesh. "Look here, lad. See the carving on the tooth?" Kai showed the tooth to Gilu. It was engraved with the letter Q. "What does this mean, Kai? Did the Khan dig him up? Where did they take him?" Kai looked at the sky through the tree branches and let out a loud and fearful sigh. "No one dug these bones up, Gilu. They burrowed out themselves." Kai rubbed his eyes and continued. This was a bargain struck by Sand to his new masters when he betrayed his race and fell in line with the black magic of the Khan. Gilu sat down in the same spot where he mourned his dead companion less than 3 dawns ago. "I'll bet you those bones buried only spent a short time in the ground, lad. They were summoned back to the place whence he started his hunt." Gilu interrupted. "Where was that?" "Sepra, of course. He returned back to that hole of deception to burn, like his song proclaimed he would. He probably marched past you out of the city down to Lek. Just another burning ember condemned to his fate by his master's decree." Gilu muttered, "Fuck him then. Glad the bastard suffered before he drowned in that cold sea." Kai looked at him, staring down into the grave. He dug himself, and he felt he had to explain Sand's fate, now obvious to him. "Sit back down, Gilu," Kai asked. "I'll tell you his fate, lad, but it's not a tale for those of weak hearts or stomachs." "Go on, please explain," implored Gilu, "because I am sick of being confused." Gilu trembled in more anger than fear. Evil bastard. Evil. Yeah, that's the best word to start this, indeed. When the Khan family rose their city walls and shunned the world to practice their dark arts of enslavement, they discovered a magic far stronger than they would ever know. The Khan used spells stolen from the well archives. Archives kept under armed guard on pain of death, I might add. I'm sure of this, The Book of the Flame was a grim volume, locked away from the reach of anyone with no scruples. How they stole it, this is unknown to me, but I imagine it was a spy that did the dirty business of liberating the book. In the old tongue of High Canna, the word fire is translated as Fey. That island was summoned to the surface by a ritual that probably lasted months or even years. When I was a child, not one person had a memory or a myth about a migrating island of death and bad luck. Only when I grew to be of age and took up my vow in the order, that's when the first creeping hands began to seize the surrounding land. This is when the darkest times began. People turned to slaves and towns turned to ash. Fire and death rampaged across all the shores of the Lek, and when anyone caught a glimpse of that blot on the horizon as you did, lad, they fled in fear of their lives. It is said that on the west shores of the Sea of Lek there is a city of fire. Among the desolate wastes of the desert dwells the place known quietly as the Embers, a place where the captured dwell in a permanent inferno. Relics of former humanity live as anonymous burnt offerings to the Khan. Fuck, breathed Jilu, almost asphyxiated with horror. I never knew that the life I thought I was missing and have craved for outside those old decrepit walls would be so foul and pitiful. Makes me wonder if there is actually anything pure left to live and strive out for in the wild. Kai wept at Jilu's despair, as he knew only too well that he spoke the truth about the evils and debased acts caused in the name of war and magic. You're a wise soul, lad. You see the facts in front of your eyes more swiftly than most. Yes, this world is inherently a twisted and unfair plane long bereft of logic or love on the whole. But the glimmers of hope we must hold dear to are too precious to let grow dim in the face of such adversity. Kai looked down at the sorrowful, damp eyes of Jilu. Take our chance meeting, laddie. You thought I would kill you for a moment. I thought I'd kill you. I thought you were a spy. We had no common ground to speak of whatsoever. Now we do have a bond. Our bond is not in blood or under a banner, nor are we the same tribe or class. Yet our bond is far more noble than any other, and do you realise why, my friend? Jilu masked his world-weary face with the smallest of smiles, like a crack in the lens, and replied, Why? Kai drew his sword and plunged it into the earth next to the empty grave. He showed his open hands in a gesture of friendship and replied, Kai and Jilu, refugees from their lands of no common flock, of no shared blood or kin, instead conjoined in the quest for knowledge and the truth. No nobler quest can be endeavoured than a friendship based upon loyalty to the truth. Kai took off his right glove and showed his palm to Jilu. It was covered from wrist to fingertip in deep cuts, all healed long ago into a criss-crossing web of scar tissue. See these, lad? Each one of these gashes on my skin represent a blood pact I have taken, swearing my bond to a friend. The only thing I can break a promise of this kind. Death. Jilu looked down at his rough hands, scarred indeed, but with no brokered deal made with anyone apart from his own torment. Kai knelt by his sword and grasped the blade embedded in the soil. He grabbed so hard that blood trickled from his palm onto the ground. Come, lad, make this pact with me, to our continued friendship as the brothers of the wilderness. Jilu nervously knelt by Kai. Slightly timidly he brought his hand forwards, towards the razor-sharp blade. He took a final breath of solitude and lunged forward. With all his strength he pressed his skin into the blood-stained steel. With a shout of pain he breathed out, now no longer in solitude, but instead with a newly found solidarity with a blood brother, Kai. With blood-stained hands they embraced and laughed. Now the world will have to be ready for us, Instead of us fearing it, Kai shouted, with all the power his lungs could muster.